Hi, my name is Kimberly Kaler, and I'm here today to talk to you about succession planning, a topic of great interest in our industry. So what is succession planning? It's strategic, it's systematic, and it's deliberate, and it's supposed to be designed as a way to actually ensure connectivity and continuity within your organization, and it's based on merit principles. So a lot of jargon words I just used, right? Well, I'll keep adding to it. Best practices, focusing on ensuring the availability and sustainability of a supply of capable staff or maybe membership. We should think of this also in terms of our associations and the leadership that you have. So what does it entail? Training, preparing employees or those volunteer membership base so there's a continual pipeline of talent. And that requires a continual monitoring and developing of the talent to ensure you have the knowledge and skills and abilities for a leadership transition. So the big question here is succession planning. Are you ready for this? We talk often in terms of if so-and-so, if John or Mary were hit by that bus, and many of us were actually had to deal with this in the last 18 months or so, 20 months related to COVID, being hit by the COVID bus. What if somebody in your office was out because of COVID, or even in a leadership capacity was no longer able to serve? So 70% of companies or organizations say they do have some form of succession planning, yet 62% say they have few to internal candidates to meet their organizational needs. One of the challenges of that is that the info is in our head. So where is the knowledge base? Yes, it's in paper. Some of us have been really good about documenting procedures and the way of doing things, the way your organization works, maybe for a board or organization, even membership roles. But a good 51% of the knowledge base does reside in our brains. And at higher level positions, 80 to 90% of that corporate load can be in our brains. So that is one of the reasons succession planning often fails. Others are that the candidates are arbitrarily identified, or maybe it's simply just based on time. Oh, he or she is going to move up. They've been in that position. They've been the second in command, but they don't necessarily have the skill set needed. Or you really need to take a look at the jobs too. Does the job description that the leader had or has, does it still appropriate for where you want to move the organization? Making sure that those position descriptions also tie with the strategic vision of the organization, and also looking and understanding the transparency with regard to all of these discussions. One thing that may be interesting to look at is to think of your succession planning in terms of replacement planning, which is how it's traditionally done, or true succession planning. Replacement planning often is very reactive. It's a form of risk management. It really comes in terms of a substitute. When he or she retires, we're going to put this person in place. And it really is a narrow approach. Consider instead maybe being more proactive, planned future development, renewing, broader, and more organized. So this is a standard process talent review grid. If you Google succession planning, chances are you're going to find all sorts of articles, a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of how-tos with this kind of content. And this is awesome. This is great. This is a great way for you to plan your organizational succession planning, as well as just talent development and growth. However, I will share with you, as you start to chart all these things out, they're all well and good, and I do believe they're a necessary step. But I think what is missing, because too often when we employ these tactics, we then create some sort of comfort that we're just going to replace X with X. Again, replacing, not actually truly developing. So instead, maybe consider another part of succession planning is a different philosophy, which I have adopted over the last couple of years, as it seems to work better. If we are always just saying this person is going to substitute here, things don't typically work out that way. What if instead you did have that continual growth of employees as well as your membership, but you had that action plan for the what ifs? So, really taking a step back and looking at succession planning, not just in terms of employee development and growth, member development and growth in terms of leadership capacity, but also for handling the what ifs from a crisis standpoint, if you will. So considering at the beginning, are you writing this plan for a retirement, plan for the unexpected, or both? If there is a retirement in place, what's the timeline? Talking about transition timelines. And if you're planning for the unexpected, what events would trigger a succession plan? We worked on a lot of succession plans with our associations that we work with during the last couple of years. And though we did cover illness, we didn't really specifically state a pandemic. So we've all learned a lot of lessons with regard to that. We did have an association executive director that was out with COVID. So having a succession plan in place is really helpful to actually get through those intermediary steps. So if we are actually naming a successor, outlining the key employees that may be interested or key members, obvious outside candidates, maybe outside of the organization, and tracking this information. It's something that's really good from the high leadership standpoint, or maybe even from a board level. And then really in terms of your crisis plan related to succession planning, where most have a challenge is somebody leaves unexpectedly for whatever reason. And there is a huge gap, not only in the knowledge, we already talked about that in terms of what's in our brains and maybe isn't on paper anywhere, but from a resource standpoint, in terms of the right passwords, getting into documents, not knowing where things are. So now is a chance as part of succession planning to really identify those proper documents, understand the operational IT side of things, looking at skill retention, passwords, org chart, procedures for training, employee performance tools and metrics. All of them should be called out in your succession plan. Communications is also really key. So this part of the succession plan document would outline the communication channels needed related to either an interim replacement or if a succession plan is put in place. So who are the key stakeholders that need to be identified? So for example, if your executive director, maybe the president of your board, gets COVID and is out of the picture, or let's look at a happy scenario. Maybe the person wins the lottery and disappears from the industry overnight and says, hey, I've not enough of this. Who are the stakeholders that need to be identified and communicated with immediately? And can you draft some of those messages beforehand? Yes, obviously you're going to have to adapt them, but to having them ready to plug and play sure helps, just like anything else in crisis communications. So here's a sample plan in terms of what it may look like. And it doesn't specifically state, hey, this is the person that's going to take over, but maybe it does identify who can jump in the interim, be an interim president, an interim executive director, an interim chair, as you actually go through that search part of it. And then clearly distinguishing who's in charge as well. So if your association executive director leaves, what happens? Who's in charge? Is it the next person in line from staff, or is it the executive committee or the board? You don't want to have to be figuring out the answer to that question during the actual crisis. So naming the successor, if there is an opportunity to name the successor, that's great. But I would really encourage you to name the successor in terms of an interim, because plans have a way of sitting on the shelf, and you want to be able to take it and look at it and say, okay, let's move the interim person in, the named person in to the position, but let's take a step back and look at the job description, look at where we are and see if we do want to make any changes before we actually name that person, or maybe we need to bring in somebody from the outside or somebody else internally. And then listing all of the different resources. We've learned the hard way with the associations we manage that if somebody does leave, if you think you have all of the information, you have all the passwords, and you don't, you never have all of it. So what can you do here to make sure you have a document compiled out of the office that has all of the information you would need if somebody else had to jump in quickly with regards to running the organization, keeping things moving? And then communication, outlining the objectives, the key audiences. Again, communication tactics we have listed here. So-and-so would report to so-and-so, here is the information they would share, etc. Of course, you're going to need to modify these to each situation, but like anything else with crisis calm, if you've got a head start, it's really going to go a long way. And then skills development. I'm not saying don't plan, don't develop your people, please do, but make sure you have this other really crucial, tangible piece in place with regards to succession planning. So with that, I will thank you for joining me today for this quick discussion on succession planning. Look forward to hearing what you think of this topic, as well as any other topic. Please feel free to follow us and join the conversation. Thank you.